My name is Victoria Bennett. I am 35 years old. And if someone had told me a year ago that my own brother would try to stop me from entering a hotel that I owned, I probably would have laughed. Not because it sounded impossible, but because it sounded exactly like something Ethan Bennett would do. The strange thing about being underestimated your entire life is that eventually, people stop seeing who you are and start seeing only the version of you that makes them comfortable. In my family, Ethan was the golden child. I was the afterthought. And for years, everyone seemed perfectly happy with that arrangement. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood on Chicago's North Shore, where appearances mattered almost as much as money. My mother, Eleanor Bennett, cared deeply about what people thought. Every holiday dinner, every charity event, every neighborhood gathering was carefully orchestrated to present the image of the perfect family. And in that image, my younger brother Ethan always stood center stage. Ethan had the kind of personality that instantly won people over. He was charismatic, funny, athletic, and effortlessly charming. Teachers adored him. Neighbors praised him. My mother's friends couldn't stop talking about him. My father, Richard Bennett, rarely expressed strong opinions about anything, but even his silence favored Ethan. I, on the other hand, was different. I was quiet, observant, introverted. While Ethan entertained rooms, I studied them. I noticed details other people ignored. I noticed when servers looked overwhelmed before anyone else did. I noticed when customers were becoming frustrated long before they complained. I noticed how a perfectly designed space could completely change a person's mood. Even as a teenager, I found myself fascinated by hotels. Not because they were luxurious, but because they were complex. Hundreds of moving pieces had to work together perfectly every single day. One mistake could ruin a guest's experience. One exceptional employee could completely transform it. I loved that. When I was 16, I took a part-time job as a hostess at a small boutique hotel restaurant. I loved every minute of it. The pace, the pressure, the constant problem-solving. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found something I genuinely excelled at. So naturally, my family hated the idea. The first time I told my mother I wanted to pursue hospitality management professionally, she actually laughed. A hotel, she asked. She wasn't trying to be cruel. That was simply who she was. Disappointment wrapped in politeness. Victoria, you're intelligent. Surely you can do something more ambitious. I remember looking across the dinner table and asking, like what? Before my mother could answer, Ethan jumped in. I'm thinking about sales or corporate consulting. My mother's entire face lit up. Now that's exciting, she said proudly. That moment perfectly summarized my childhood. When Ethan talked about dreams, people saw potential. When I talked about dreams, people saw limitations. The favoritism became impossible to ignore as we grew older. When Ethan turned 17, my parents bought him a luxury SUV because, according to my mother, he needed transportation to build professional connections. When I turned 17 6 months later, I received a speech about independence and self-reliance. My parents paid Ethan's college tuition. They paid for his apartment. They paid for his meal plan. They paid for emergencies that somehow happened every few weeks. I attended community college while working 30 hours a week. My mother described Ethan as ambitious. She described me as still figuring things out. At family gatherings, relatives constantly asked Ethan about his future. When conversation turned to me, someone inevitably asked, "So, are you still working at that hotel?" Still. I hated that word. As though my career were some temporary inconvenience. As though I were simply passing time until real success arrived. At first, I corrected people. Eventually, I stopped. Because correcting people who are committed to misunderstanding you is exhausting. So instead I worked. Hard. Harder than anyone around me realized. I transferred into a 4-year hospitality management program. I graduated near the top of my class. I accepted every difficult assignment nobody else wanted. Front desk. Night audit. Reservations. Guest recovery. Event coordination. I learned every aspect of hotel operations from the ground up. Those years taught me something invaluable. Luxury means nothing without systems. Beautiful buildings fail every day. Great operations endure. By 28, I had developed a reputation as someone capable of rescuing struggling properties. Owners began hiring me to identify inefficiencies, improve service standards, and increase profitability. I discovered that I had a talent for seeing patterns. I could walk through a failing hotel and identify problems within hours. Poor staffing models, wasteful spending, ineffective management, broken service culture. While others saw chaos, I saw solutions. Then 6 years ago, everything changed. An investor invited me to evaluate an aging boutique hotel in downtown Chicago. The property had once been magnificent. Now it was dying. Occupancy rates were collapsing. Guest reviews were terrible. Employee turnover was disastrous. Most investors considered it beyond saving. The moment I walked through the lobby, I disagreed. The building had extraordinary potential. Historic architecture, prime location, exceptional bones. It simply lacked leadership. I spent 3 weeks analyzing every aspect of the operation. Then I presented my findings. The investors expected a standard consulting report. Instead, I handed them a complete transformation strategy, renovation schedules, operational restructuring, brand repositioning, revenue projections, marketing strategy, staff culture redesign. When I finished, the room remained silent. Finally, one investor asked, "How confident are you that this will work?" I answered honestly, "Completely." That answer changed my life. The investors offered me something unexpected. Partnership. I invested every dollar I had saved. I mortgaged nearly everything. For the next 18 months, I lived and breathed that property. I arrived before sunrise. I left after midnight. Sometimes I slept in vacant guest suites because driving home felt unnecessary. I negotiated vendor contracts, oversaw renovations, interviewed staff, managed crises, solved problems. Repeatedly. Slowly the impossible happened. Guest reviews improved. Occupancy increased. Corporate bookings returned. Revenue climbed. The forgotten property transformed into one of Chicago's premier luxury destinations. We renamed it the Sterling Grand Chicago. 3 years later, I purchased controlling ownership. Then came expansion. Milwaukee, Detroit, Indianapolis. Eventually, Bennett Legacy Hospitality was born. By 35, I owned multiple luxury properties across the Midwest. My family knew almost none of this. Not because I deliberately hid it. They simply never asked. To them, I still worked in hotels. And honestly, allowing them to believe that became easier than explaining the truth. Then my mother's text message arrived. And everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing renovation proposals for our Milwaukee property when my phone buzzed repeatedly. The Bennett family group chat. Normally, I muted it. Years of passive-aggressive comments, unnecessary arguments, and endless praise for Ethan had taught me that protecting my peace was often easier than participating. But something made me open it. My mother had sent several messages. "Eleanor, Richard's 65th birthday is coming up, and I want this celebration to be special." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Eleanor, I've narrowed it down to 3 venues." Attached were links. I clicked the first. A country club. The second. An upscale steakhouse. Then I clicked the third. I nearly laughed out loud. The Sterling Grand Chicago. My hotel. Apparently, one of my mother's charity board friends had recently attended a fundraising gala there, and couldn't stop talking about it. According to my mother, it was exclusive, sophisticated, and nearly impossible to reserve. Exactly the sort of place she loved. Not because she appreciated the craftsmanship behind it. Because she loved being seen in places other people couldn't access. Ethan responded immediately. "Ethan, the Sterling Grand is perfect. Dad would love it." Another message appeared seconds later. "Ethan, I'll handle most of the bill. Everyone just needs to be organized for once." I stared at the screen. Even after years of watching him perform generosity with other people's money, Ethan still managed to surprise me. I considered telling them. I really did. A simple message. "Actually, I own the Sterling Grand." That would have ended the conversation instantly. But my fingers never touched the keyboard. Instead, I called my general manager, Sophia Reed. "Sophia," I said, "you're about to receive a reservation request from the Bennett family." She laughed softly. "Your family? Unfortunately. How would you like us to handle it?" I thought about that question for several seconds. Then I said, "Give them the Lakeview private suite." There was silence. "Victoria, that's our best room." "I know. What else?" "The premium tasting menu." "Done." "The 25-year bourbon package." Absolutely. Custom floral arrangements. Of course. And reduce the quoted rate by 40%. I'll personally cover the difference. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Finally, she asked carefully, "Do you want the staff to know who they're serving?" "Only senior management," I said. "Everyone else treats this like a standard reservation." "No special acknowledgement?" "None." Sophia hesitated. "You're planning something." "Not exactly." "What are you planning, Victoria?" I looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office toward downtown Chicago. I'm just tired of correcting people who don't listen. 3 days later, Ethan called. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. "Hey," he said. "No greeting. No asking how I was. Typical. Mom said you helped secure the reservation." I made a phone call. "Good," he said. "Just don't make dinner weird." I leaned back in my chair. "Weird? You know what I mean." "No. Actually, I don't." He sighed dramatically. "Don't show up late because of work. Don't spend the entire evening talking about hotels. And please don't act like you understand luxury, because you work around it." For a second, I genuinely couldn't speak. Not because I was hurt, because I was amazed. I owned the building. And Ethan was giving me etiquette advice. "Anything else?" I asked calmly. "Yeah," he said, lowering his voice. "If money is tight, let me know privately. I'll cover your portion of dinner. No need to embarrass yourself." I almost laughed. Instead, I thanked him. Then I ended the call. After hanging up, I sat silently in my office. Oddly enough, I wasn't angry. I was certain. Certain that nothing had changed. My family still saw me exactly as they always had. The struggling daughter. The quiet sibling. The one who never quite lived up to expectations. And for the first time in my life, I decided not to protect them from the consequences of those assumptions. Over the next several weeks, preparations continued. Sophia coordinated every detail personally. The menu featured my father's favorite dishes. The bourbon selection had been chosen specifically for him. I even arranged for childhood photographs to be professionally restored and displayed beside the birthday cake. No one in my family knew. As the celebration approached, my mother became increasingly excited. She called several times to discuss dress codes, guest lists, and seating arrangements. Not once did she ask me about my life. Not once did she ask how business was going. Not once did she wonder why securing such an exclusive reservation had been surprisingly easy. People rarely investigate miracles that benefit them. The morning of the dinner arrived. I spent most of the day moving between meetings. Around 4 o'clock, Sophia entered my office. "Everything is ready," she said. "Any issues?" "None." She paused. "Are you nervous?" I considered the question. "A little." "About revealing the truth?" I shook my head. "No." "Then what?" I smiled sadly. "I'm nervous that even after they learn the truth, nothing will change." Sophia didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said quietly, "Sometimes people change. Sometimes they don't. And if they don't, then at least you'll finally know." By 6:30 that evening, my family had already arrived at the Sterling Grand. I intentionally stayed behind. I wanted them comfortable, relaxed, confident. I wanted them fully convinced they understood the world they had entered. Because sometimes, people only recognize reality when it completely contradicts their expectations. At 7:15, I left my office. I changed into a black evening dress. Simple, elegant, professional. As I looked at my reflection, I realized something surprising. I wasn't anxious anymore. I was calm. Because regardless of what happened that night, I finally understood something important. I no longer needed my family's approval. I had already built a life without it. I arrived at the Sterling Grand 20 minutes later. The building glowed against the Chicago skyline. Warm light spilled through enormous windows. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance. Guests moved gracefully through the lobby. It was beautiful. Not because it was expensive. Because I had built it. I handed my keys to valet. The doorman recognized me immediately. Per instructions, he simply nodded respectfully and opened the door. I had barely taken 3 steps toward the entrance when the glass doors opened. And Ethan walked out. The expression on his face told me immediately. He had been waiting for me. And somehow, I knew exactly what was about to happen. I just didn't realize how public it would become. The moment Ethan stepped through the revolving doors, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal greeting. He was smiling. Not a warm smile. Not the kind siblings exchange when they're genuinely happy to see each other. It was the smile he had worn his entire life whenever he believed he had the upper hand. The smile that said, "I already know how this conversation ends." He stopped directly in front of me. "Wow," he said, looking me over. "You actually came." I raised an eyebrow. "It's Dad's birthday. Why wouldn't I come?" Ethan chuckled. "No, I mean here. To a place like this." He gestured casually toward the glowing entrance of the Sterling Grand. For a brief second, I wondered if he somehow knew. Maybe someone on staff had said something. Maybe my mother had accidentally discovered the truth. But then Ethan spoke again. And I realized he knew absolutely nothing. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "this isn't exactly your scene." I looked at him calmly. "Move, Ethan." Instead, he shifted slightly, intentionally blocking the doorway. Behind him, guests continued entering and leaving the hotel. A few people had already started noticing us. Unfortunately, Ethan noticed that too. And like our mother, he loved an audience. "Look," he said with exaggerated patience. "If you're worried about tonight's cost, you should have said something before now." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "The bill." He sighed dramatically. "I told Mom I'd take care of most of it, but if you're struggling financially, you could have told me privately." A couple standing near the concierge desk glanced in our direction. I could already feel the attention shifting. People are naturally drawn to discomfort. Especially expensive discomfort. "I'm not struggling financially," I said. Ethan smiled. "Sure." Before I could answer, another familiar voice interrupted. "Please don't do this tonight." My mother. Eleanor Bennett approached us quickly, her heels striking the marble floor with sharp precision. She took one look at Ethan standing in front of me and instantly decided I must be responsible. Some things never changed. "We have important guests inside," she whispered harshly. "Please don't embarrass this family." I looked at her for several seconds. "Mom, I'm literally standing here." "Exactly," she said. "And you're already making people uncomfortable." I almost laughed. After 35 years, the predictability would have been funny if it hadn't been so sad. Ethan folded his arms. "If money's the issue, I'll cover your portion. But let's not create a scene." "Your portion." Those words echoed in my mind. The irony was almost unbearable. For a moment, I considered ending it right there. One sentence. One truth. Instead, I simply said, "Move." Neither of them moved. By now, several people inside the lobby were openly watching. One of my mother's longtime friends stood near the lounge entrance, pretending not to stare. The concierge had become unusually interested in organizing menus. Even the valet attendants were occasionally glancing toward the doors. The atmosphere had shifted. Then everything changed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Gabriel Torres crossing the lobby. Gabriel had served as director of security for the Sterling Grand for nearly 4 years. Former military. Exceptionally disciplined. Impossible to intimidate. More importantly, Gabriel understood people. He recognized tension long before it escalated. He also happened to know exactly who owned the hotel. Ethan noticed him approaching and visibly relaxed. For the first time all evening, I almost smiled. Because Ethan had misunderstood the situation completely. He thought security was coming to remove me. My mother apparently thought the same thing. I could practically see relief spreading across her face. Gabriel reached us. He stopped beside me. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Gabriel turned toward Ethan. "Sir," he said calmly, "I'm going to need you to step away from Ms. Bennett." Ethan blinked. "What? You're blocking the owner from entering her property." Silence. Absolute silence. The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Somewhere in the distance, a glass clinked. A piano continued playing softly near the restaurant. But around us, everything stopped. Ethan stared at Gabriel. My mother stared at me. Neither appeared capable of processing what they had just heard. "I'm sorry," Ethan said finally. "What did you say?" Before Gabriel could answer, another voice spoke. "Good evening, Ms. Bennett." Sophia Reed. My general manager approached with her usual composed professionalism. She smiled warmly. "The Lakeview suite is fully prepared. The bourbon you selected arrived earlier this afternoon, and the kitchen is timing dessert according to your instructions." My mother's face drained of color. Sophia continued. "The photo display honoring Mr. Bennett's life has also been arranged exactly as requested." My mother whispered, almost to herself, Your instructions? I looked directly at her. Yes, Mom. Nobody spoke. So I continued. The private suite upstairs? I paused. I selected it. The discounted rate? I authorized it. The upgraded menu? I paid for it. The bourbon Dad likes? I chose it. The entire evening? I looked at Ethan. I arranged it. Ethan shook his head immediately. No. It wasn't anger. It was denial. Pure Daniel. You work in hotels, he said. I held his gaze. I own this hotel. More silence. Around us, the staff had subtly changed posture. Several employees who recognized me stood a little straighter. The concierge nodded respectfully. A server near the restaurant entrance smiled politely. An executive guest walking through the lobby stopped suddenly in recognition. The entire building knew exactly who I was. My family was the only group that didn't. My mother finally found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. I did. She frowned. No, you didn't. I told you I built a hospitality company. I told you I was expanding. I told you I was acquiring properties. You just never listened once the story stopped fitting the version of me you preferred. Ethan looked stunned. Completely stunned. And for the first time in our lives he had no response. Because charm doesn't help when reality arrives. Slowly, silently, Ethan stepped aside. Not because he wanted to. Because he had no choice. I walked forward. Gabriel opened the doors. Sophia walked beside me. Behind us, my mother and brother followed in silence. For the first time in my life, they weren't leading. They were simply trying to catch up. We entered the private dining suite moments later. My father, Richard Bennett, looked up from his drink and smiled. Victoria, he said warmly. There you are. Then he noticed everyone's faces. Then he noticed Sophia standing beside me. Then he noticed the strange silence filling the room. Confusion crossed his expression. What happened? I walked over and kissed his cheek. Happy birthday, Dad. Then I smiled gently. And welcome to my hotel. The room went completely silent. And in that moment, the story my family had told themselves about me for decades finally collapsed in public. For several seconds after I spoke, nobody in the private dining room moved. Nobody spoke. My father simply stared at me. I had seen many expressions on Richard Bennett's face over the years. Pride, disappointment, exhaustion, frustration. But never this. Shock. Real unfiltered shock. He slowly set his glass down. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Your hotel. I nodded. Yes, Dad. The room remained silent. Around the table sat nearly 20 guests, family friends, business associates, old neighbors, and several people from my parents' social circle. Every single one of them was watching. My mother sat down slowly, as if her legs had suddenly become unreliable. Ethan remained standing, still pale, still trying to process what had just happened. One of my father's oldest friends, Charles Whitman, cleared his throat. Victoria, he said carefully. Are you saying you own the Sterling Grand? Yes. Charles looked genuinely impressed. This place is extraordinary. Thank you. Another guest immediately joined in. I attended a corporate event here last spring. The service was exceptional. Someone else added. My company has tried booking executive retreats here for months. It's nearly impossible. The conversation shifted rapidly. Suddenly, people had questions. Real questions. Questions nobody in my family had ever bothered asking. How many properties did I own? How had I built the company? How many employees worked for me? What expansion projects were planned next? For the first time in my life, people at a family gathering wanted to hear my story. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother barely spoke during dinner. Ethan spoke even less. My father listened carefully every time I answered a question. Not politely. Not absent-mindedly. Actually listened. It felt strange. Almost unfamiliar. At one point my father quietly asked, How long have you owned this property? 5 years. He looked genuinely stunned. 5 years. I nodded. We completed the turnaround 8 years ago. I purchased controlling ownership 3 years later. My father stared down at the table. Then he asked softly, Why didn't I know that? I answered honestly. Because you never asked. That hurt him. I could see it. But it was also true. The remainder of dinner passed peacefully, though awkwardly. The guests eventually relaxed. The food was excellent. The bourbon was a success. My father genuinely enjoyed himself. But beneath everything else, something fundamental had changed. The old family hierarchy had disappeared. And everyone in the room knew it. By the end of the evening, guests began leaving. Many stopped to congratulate me personally. Several asked for business cards. One woman asked whether I offered mentorship opportunities for young professionals. My mother watched every interaction silently. As the evening ended, my father hugged me. Longer than usual. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For tonight." I smiled. "Happy birthday, Dad." Then I went home. I knew the phone calls would begin. I just didn't realize how quickly. My phone rang at 6:42 the next morning. Mother. I ignored it. 2 minutes later. Mother again. Ignored. Then Ethan. Ignored. By 7:30, I had 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails, and a series of increasingly emotional text messages. The first message came from Ethan. "Ethan, I think last night got blown out of proportion. Interesting opening." The second message arrived 5 minutes later. "Ethan, you should have told us beforehand." The third, "Ethan, you made me look ridiculous." I stared at the screen. No apology. Not one. Everything remained centered on him. How predictable. Then my mother's message arrived. It was significantly longer. According to her, I had humiliated the family. I had embarrassed her in front of lifelong friends. I had allowed people to think she didn't know her own daughter. That final sentence caught my attention. Because it was the closest she had come to acknowledging the actual problem. She didn't know her own daughter. And somehow, she believed that reflected poorly on me. The only message that felt different came from my father. It contained just one sentence. "I owe you a conversation when you're ready." Nothing more. No excuses. No defensiveness. Just accountability. I appreciated that. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I spent the morning establishing boundaries I should have established years earlier. I spoke with my executive assistant. I spoke with Sophia. I spoke with my attorney. No family member would receive complimentary rooms, preferred rates, upgrades, or access to company resources without direct approval from me. No exceptions. It wasn't punishment. It was policy. Healthy relationships require boundaries. By midday, my mother's messages changed tone. Anger gradually transformed into desperation. One voicemail particularly stood out. "Victoria, I don't understand why you would do this to me," she said, her voice trembling. "People are talking. They think I deliberately hid your success." I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. I hadn't done anything to my mother. I had simply stopped protecting her from reality. Late that afternoon, Ethan called from an unfamiliar number. Curiosity got the better of me. I answered. "Victoria." His voice sounded strained. "I've been trying to reach you." I noticed. He sighed heavily. "Look, things got out of hand." I remained silent. "Ethan," I said finally. "Do you want to apologize?" There was a pause. "I mean, obviously, I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt." I closed my eyes. There it was. The non-apology. The classic escape route. "I'm serious," he continued. "One of the executives I invited last night hasn't returned my calls today." I said nothing. "And people are talking." Still nothing. "I just think you could have handled things differently." I laughed softly. It wasn't a happy laugh. "You blocked me from entering my own hotel." Silence. "You offered to pay for dinner at an event I organized." More silence. "You humiliated me publicly." He finally spoke. "I was joking." "No," I said calmly. "You weren't." He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. After several uncomfortable seconds, I asked a simple question. "Did it ever occur to you to apologize before explaining how this affected you?" Ethan said nothing. That answer told me everything. I ended the call. 3 days later, the real fallout began. One of the business contacts Ethan had invited to impress at my father's birthday requested a meeting. Not with Ethan. With me. The man introduced himself politely. Then he said something I will never forget. "I watched your brother publicly diminish a woman executive in her own building," he said. "And frankly, it made me reconsider doing business with him." I thanked him for his honesty. An hour later, Ethan called furious. He accused me of sabotaging him. I told him the truth. "I didn't sabotage you, Ethan." I paused. You introduced everyone to exactly who you are. And for the first time in his life, he had no one else to blame. 3 days after the birthday dinner, my life had already settled into a new kind of silence. Not peaceful silence. Controlled silence. The kind that comes after a storm when everyone is waiting to see what pieces are left standing. My father was the first to request a meeting. Not demand. Request. That alone told me something had shifted. We met in my office at the Sterling Grand. He arrived alone. No entourage. No prepared speech. Just a man who looked older than he had a week ago. For a long moment he didn't speak. He simply looked around my office. The view of Chicago. The framed development plans. The financial reports on my desk. Finally he sat down. I should have known, he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. Known what? That you were building something like this. I folded my hands. Why should you have known? He hesitated. Because that was the real question. Not whether I had succeeded, but why he had never seen it. I was busy, he said finally. It wasn't an excuse. It was an admission. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. You were. That silence stretched again. Then he leaned forward slightly. Did your mother know? I looked at him for a moment before answering. Yes. His expression tightened. She knew and never told me? It wasn't about telling you, I said. It was about believing me. That hit harder than anything else. Because belief is not passive. It's a choice. My father looked down at his hands. I let her run the family, he said. It was easier. I thought keeping peace meant avoiding conflict. I listened without interrupting. But I didn't realize, he continued, that peace for me meant silence for you. For the first time, there was no defensiveness in his voice. Just clarity. I appreciated that. Not forgiveness. Clarity. Before he left, he asked one final question. Are you trying to punish us? I shook my head. No. Then what are you doing? I looked out the window at the city I had built my life in. Ending a pattern. He nodded slowly, as if that answer made more sense than anything else. And then he left. My meeting with my mother happened 2 days later. She arrived differently. Not quietly. Not humbly. Prepared. She wore a cream-colored coat. Perfect hair, controlled expression. She had rehearsed this. That much was obvious. The moment she sat down, she began speaking. I never meant to hurt you, she said quickly. You have to understand, Victoria. I was always trying to push you to be realistic. I said nothing. She continued. Ethan needed more support. He was more social, more exposed. You were always independent. You didn't seem to need as much help. There it was. The justification. Not cruelty. Categorization. I finally spoke. So you gave him everything because he was fragile? Yes, she said immediately. And I got less because I was strong. She hesitated. That's not what I meant. But it was exactly what she meant. I leaned forward slightly. Do you know what's ironic, Mom? She stayed quiet. I was strong because I had no other option. Her expression faltered slightly. I continued. You didn't raise a daughter who needed less. You raised one who stopped asking. For the first time, her composure cracked just a little. Not dramatically, but enough. She shifted in her seat. I did what I thought was best, she said softer now. I nodded. I believe you. That surprised her. But that doesn't make it fair. Silence again. This time heavier. Then I told her about the final decision. No more financial support through hidden channels. No more private payments disguised as generosity from elsewhere. No more using my resources without acknowledgement. She stared at me. Are you cutting us off? I shook my head. No, I'm making things visible. That sentence landed differently. Because invisibility had been the system. Ethan's privileges had been visible. Mine had been erased. She didn't have a response for that. None of them usually did. When she left, she didn't argue further. But she also didn't apologize. And I understood something important in that moment. Some people don't apologize because they think acknowledgement is surrender. Then came Ethan. He chose a public space. The restaurant inside my hotel. That alone told me everything. He still believed image mattered more than truth. He arrived in a tailored suit. Confident posture. Controlled expression. The version of Ethan that worked in meetings. Not the one who blocked me at the entrance. We sat across from each other. He started with something carefully rehearsed. I want to move forward, he said. I respect what you've built. I nodded once. And he smiled slightly. And I think we should put this behind us. A pause. Then he added, I also think it would be good for the company if we hosted a few client dinners here. At a preferred rate, of course. There it was. The pivot. Always the pivot. From apology to opportunity. From accountability to access. I looked at him for a long moment. Ethan, I said calmly, you haven't apologized. He sighed. I already said I was sorry if you felt disrespected. I nodded. That's not an apology. His smile faded slightly. Come on, don't do this. Do what? Make everything complicated. I almost laughed. You blocked me from my own hotel. He leaned forward. That was a joke. No, I said. It was a choice. Silence. I continued. You didn't think I belonged there. He didn't respond. Because he didn't need to. His silence answered for him. Then I said the final thing. If your apology comes with a request attached, it isn't an apology. His expression tightened. You're really going to do this? Yes. I stood up. And Ethan? He looked up. This is what accountability looks like. I left him sitting there. For the first time in his life, Ethan Bennett had nothing to charm, nothing to perform, and no one left to manipulate. Just consequences. And silence. The kind that teaches what words never could. After Ethan's meeting, something in the Bennett family finally stopped moving the way it used to. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing could be denied anymore. Truth, once exposed, doesn't disappear again. It just settles. And forces everyone to decide what they are going to do with it. My father was the first to adjust. He didn't try to undo the past. He didn't ask for forgiveness in a dramatic way. Instead, he started doing something unfamiliar for him. He showed up consistently. He called before visiting. He listened more than he spoke. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was competing for space in my own family. One evening, he asked to meet me again. This time not at the hotel, but at a quiet cafe near the river. He looked different again. Not older this time. Just lighter. I've been thinking, he said. I waited. I spent years believing I was keeping the peace in our family, he continued. But I think I was just avoiding responsibility. I didn't interrupt. That night at the hotel, I saw how Ethan treated you. I saw how your mother reacted. And I realized I never corrected any of it. He paused. That silence was my decision too. That was the first time he didn't position himself as neutral. It mattered. Because neutrality in injustice is still participation. I nodded slowly. I don't need you to fix it, I said. I know, he replied immediately. But I need to stop pretending I didn't contribute to it. That was enough for me. Not resolution, but honesty. Meanwhile, my mother struggled in a very different way. She didn't know how to exist without control. For her, love had always been structure, expectation, hierarchy. And now those structures had collapsed. She called less frequently, then more carefully, then not at all for a while. When she finally did reach out, it wasn't to argue. It was to ask. How do I talk to you now? She said once. That question stayed with me longer than any accusation ever had. Because it revealed something important. She wasn't asking how to reconnect. She was asking how to regain access. And access was no longer the system. It was earned. Ethan changed the least. At least at first. He attempted a few more business-minded conversations. He sent messages framed as collaboration. He tried to rebuild influence through professionalism. But influence built on entitlement collapses quickly in environments built on merit. A few deals fell through. A few contacts stopped responding. And slowly his tone changed. Less confident. More uncertain. Not humbled yet. But destabilized. The version of the world he had relied on no longer responded to him the same way. And that was new for him. Very new. 6 months passed. The Sterling Grand continued to grow. We expanded another property into a new city. The mentorship program for young women entering hospitality gained unexpected traction. And I noticed something subtle but meaningful. People no longer asked me if I worked in hotels. They asked how I built them. That shift matters more than most people realize. Because one question reduces you. The other recognizes you. One evening, I stayed late in my office after everyone left. The city outside was quiet in that soft Chicago way it gets just before midnight. Gabriel, my security director, Knocked lightly before entering. "You're still here," he said. "I could say the same to you," I replied. He smiled slightly. "You know," he said, "I've seen a lot of family situations in this job." I leaned back in my chair. "And?" He paused. "You didn't overreact." That surprised me. Most people expect emotional reactions to injustice. But he had seen enough to recognize something else. Control. Boundaries. Clarity. "I used to think I needed them to understand me," I said quietly. "And now?" I looked toward the skyline. "Now I just need them not to define me." He nodded once. Then left. A few days later, my father called again. This time he asked something different. "Would you be willing to come to dinner at home? Not a hotel. Not a public place. Home." I agreed. It was quiet. Awkward at times. But honest. Ethan was there. Less sharp. Less performative. My mother was quieter than I had ever seen her. At one point, she said something I didn't expect. "I didn't know how to see you," she admitted. I looked at her. "That's the problem," I said gently. "You never tried to learn." She nodded slowly. No argument. Just acknowledgement. And that was the closest thing to change I would ever get from her. It wasn't transformation. But it was awareness. And sometimes that is where people start. After dinner, my father walked me to the door. Before I left, he said something simple. "I'm proud of you." Not because of the hotel. Not because of the business. But because I didn't disappear under the weight of being misunderstood. On the drive back, I realized something important. This wasn't a story about revenge. It never was. It was about visibility. About what happens when someone finally stops shrinking themselves to fit inside other people's narratives. The truth is simple. You can love people and still refuse to be diminished by them. You can forgive without returning to old roles. And you can build a life so solid that even the people who misunderstood you are forced to recognize it. Not immediately. Not comfortably. But eventually. And that is enough. Because the real victory was never the hotel. It was no longer needing permission to exist at full size. And once you reach that point, no one can quietly make you small again.